Forwarding, call recording and more. Integrate with top CRMs like Salesforce, HubSpot, Zoho and Microsoft Teams. Whether in the office or remote, work with ease using Nuacom's computer and mobile apps. For more information, see nuacom.ie. That's nuacom.ie.
You ain't shit! I wish I was 50 years younger and I'd kick your ass.
Well, fans can be the harshest critics, you know.
And they often are.
A wife is often the harshest critic of her husband.
I thought I was invincible. That's what you're trained to believe as a sports person.
There was 4 million people in Ireland who knew much more about managing football teams than I did. When it comes to music, I can spoof with the best.
Your sporting career is the best time you'll have, and you know you have to hang on to it for as long as you like, because everything else is pretty crappy.
And this is not lies. Stephen Rothschild has never spoken to Jim McGuigan in his life.
We'll,
is that okay with that?
Are we live? We are live. I was in my own world there completely. Roy Curtis, what's the story?
Johnny, good to see you. It's normally at race preview nights for Cheltenham we meet up. And
it is indeed. And you're deliberating what to do for the weekend, which will be part of the chat we'll have about liking life too much and trying to do a JD on it and be kind of good about life and be sensible.
To prove that I'm a creature of abstinence, I was going to go to Dublin and Wexford, but I came in here instead. So now I have to meet some friends in the pub and watch Dublin and Wexford and Waterford and Limerick. It'll get you down, this stuff.
You were telling me your nephew, Kieran Curtis, is part of the Shamrock Rovers Revolution, their academy. He's 2004, which would put him at their under 18s maybe.
Yeah, he's doing his leaving certs this year. He's my brother's young lad. He played a couple of games with the first team in pre-season, and his younger brother again, Alex, is an underage goalkeeper who Gavin Bazuna has been in contact with regularly. So they're very immersed in it up there. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's funny. I have another side of the family where there's another nephew, Cathal McCabe, playing Christy Ring for Kildare tomorrow, and he's consumed by hurling. So the sporting genes are there, all right.
Kieran Cunningham, what's going on?
You tell me. What's going on in Johnny World? You were telling me you're captain Johnny World, somewhere nobody wants to be.
Well, I mean,
except Johnny World.
Yeah, I've seen like I'm not on Twitter, but I have to kind of monitor it for my work or whatever, and I've seen nothing but you on about boxing in recent weeks. So it's really kind of piqued my interest and got me to look back on the Panorama documentary of a year and a half ago, which I remember watching during lockdown. This story is so crazy without what's happened, I suppose, in the last week. There's only one place to start, Kieran. What's the latest on Mr. Kinahan, Tyson Fury and boxing in general?
Well, it's changing so quickly from day to day, from even hour to hour, that so much is coming out. It's a story that anybody who's covering it was quite slow and laborious for years, and for the authorities who were trying to track down the Kinahans. But then it just accelerated so quickly because of the American involvement. And, you know, there's what's fascinating about this story is a lot of the documentation that is telling us a huge amount of the story is publicly available. You know, it's like I was trawling through records in Company's House in London, and you come through all sorts of connections. And one of the things that really strikes me with this is how often people just lie to your face, John. Like the amount of people in boxing who have lied over the years about Kinahan and MTK and the connections between the two. And,
did you buy some of them lies?
Not really, no, because you hear enough from other people, even off the record, to know what's really happening. And MTK never made any much sense if there wasn't a Kinahan involvement, because where on earth did all the money come from to expand to 15 different countries, 25 different cities, and expand very rapidly during COVID and lockdown when the rest of boxing was going through a serious recession because there was very little happening. But it's a real relief that this is happening now, because it's been a very important sport to Ireland historically, and it's so many at amateur level. So many coaches are essentially unpaid social workers, and they do great work. And like one of the reasons I got interested in this story was I just got to know Michael Darragh Macaulay a bit, the former Dublin footballer.
Actually saw him on the street randomly yesterday. There you go.
Yeah. You often bump into Mick randomly in the street.
I think he was carrying like a skateboard or something. I want to say.
Yeah,
he just looks. He looks so cool. I was like,
well, that's how he did his cruciate. He was on a skateboard at a wedding 5 years ago. So it was kept quiet for 5 years because Dublin don't tell you anything, which seemed to work out okay.
There you go.
Yeah, it seemed to work out okay for them. So good luck to them. But like Mick works in the North inner city, effectively, with the community there. My wife in a previous life was a community worker in the North inner city. And I would walk a lot around the city, and like it's an area that's really stigmatized, and there's good people everywhere. But that area was so damaged by the Kinahan Hodge feud. Like if you go around the Five Lamps, which is such a landmark in there, 7 people were killed just in a handful of streets around there. And that's just near where Kelly Harrington is from. That's near where Emmett Brennan is from. Within walking distance, there's about, we say walking distance, half an hour's walk, there's 15 boxing clubs. There's a street off Sean McDermott Street that's called Champions Avenue because so many boxing champions came from there. So the connections were there that a lot of the damage that Kinahan did was in boxing country, was in traditional Irish boxing country. And to me, it was always a sports story as much as a crime story. Like the running was always done, by the crime cars like, Nicola Talon, the Sunday World, Mick O'Toole, the Star, and Stephen Breeden, the Sun, etc. But I always thought, the sport angle had to be gone after too. That boxing mattered so much to Ireland, and that this guy was becoming one of the most powerful people in a truly global sport. That had to be looked at, and I just hope the sport can recover from it now, because I think it's taken such a hammering over this, and the way people within boxing have allowed it to happen.
Yeah, I think Roy's going to touch on that point shortly. I do want to ask you, like, I subsequent to watching that Panorama documentary, which whenever that was it like a year and a half ago or something?
Yeah, it was February 2021. Yeah.
So just over a year. So after that, I kind of, I'm not really into boxing, so I sort of forgot about it. But when this came up again, and obviously, the developments of recent weeks, I didn't know anything about this podcast that you were planning. And just from a journalistic perspective, part of you must be like, almost like the people who went after Michelle Smith or went after that story where they were waiting for something to happen. Part of you must be like, okay, I'm well on top of this, but now it's developing at such a rate. Can you even keep the podcast up to date?
Yeah, well, that's been an issue over the last week, to be honest. A lot of it has to be redone because it dates fairly quickly. But I'll be very happy to get out there, Johnny, because I'd be doing my normal job. It's not like you're given 6 months off to do this, but I've been doing it on the sideline for 6 months, and it takes up a huge amount of time, and it's very frustrating because anyone who covers the story, it's really hard to get anyone to talk about it. It was for various reasons. A large part was fear of the Kinahans and any possible cartel and any possible repercussions. Also, just people not wanting to stick their head above the parapet, because even if they didn't think, there was any fear of a reprisal, there's so many connections. Like people who have no connection to MTK, like boxing is still a very small world. So you would find that they just thought it was too much of a hassle. So like even people I'd agreed to interview, some of them were subsequently pulled because they had to change of heart. Mm-hmm. Or or they agreed to do an interview and then they changed their mind at the last minute. So it's been a quite frustrating process, but I think it's working out. Like it's not going to be this exposed because everything is out there. Because not suddenly Daniel Kinahan was doing this. Like we all know who he is and what he is. We've always known. But it's more going into a broader thing, looking at the sport, particularly in Ireland, and the impact it's had, why the sport was important, what he's done to different communities, and and looking at is there a possibility of a fight back, and telling some of the Irish, just trying to keep it a bit fresh. Like I think it'd be a decent listen, but like obviously I'm biased and I'm very close to it, but we'll see how it goes.
There was one time in my journalism career where I felt a little bit threatened, and it was to do with basically Hockey League of Ireland games, and I was essentially advised that I was going down a road that this wasn't just a few lads having, the centre back and the centre forward saying, listen, have a score on yourself, score the first goal. It was way, way deeper than that. So that was one of the more interesting parts of my journalism career. And unlike the likes of Veronica Guerin, I stopped straight away. I was like, I'm not getting into this. I want to live my life. Did you feel afraid at any stage?
It's a good question. Like, my wife Peggy would have asked me on a few occasions to let it go, but I talked to Mick O'Toole about it, who does Crime for the Star, and I just asked him because he would have been very experienced, and Mick says the only threat he ever actually got in his career was from the Hutch side. He thought that Kinahan is so obsessed with his image that crime corps don't have invisible suits of armor. They get on with it. They're very brave people. And in a way, this story is a vindication of tabloid journalism, which often gets a kicking.
Yeah.
But the bulk of the story has been exposed because of tabloid journalists, particularly on the crime beat. And they deserve a huge amount of credit for that. Like the two books on Kinahan, are by Nicola Tallant and Stephen Green. So a lot of people have used that, like Panorama. The Guardian said that they use that as a base when they're reporting on these stories.
Yeah.
So
And
it's a vindication. Like, you see, it's quite funny from a media point of view, watching others play catch up now. And there's like people who are a bit sneery and sniffy about this story, but it was always a story that mattered. It should have been a big story everywhere for a long time.
You meet a lot of people playing Astro. Stephen Breen is one of them, and you could see with the Panorama stuff, they were using footage that the tabloids had in terms of, like, I don't know if you haven't seen this, they were effectively showing people being gunned down in real real TV, and it was just, I don't know, Roy, this is shocking to watch. This is not The Wire.
Johnny, can I just say something very quickly? Because Stephen Breen's book was written with Owen Conlon. I just don't want to, it's important that he gets credit as well.
Absolutely. Good to mention that as well, because it's not easy to write a book like that. This wasn't The Wire, this wasn't Peaky Blinders, this was real. Like,
Nicola Tallant to be one of my closest friends, and I would have been very friendly for a long time with Paul Williams, and you see what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and Kieran, to give him credit, has stepped into that arena, and it's a forbidding arena to step into. There's no question about it. I would certainly think twice about it. I mean, I would have grown up as a very big boxing fan, and boxing has shaded the landscape of Irish life in such vivid, uplifting colours. I grew up in a part of Dublin called Mount Talent, and Mount Talent Boxing Club, Mick Dowling's club, is based just around the corner. And having a club in the community like that, particularly but not exclusively in sort of socio-economically challenged communities, is really very, very important. It offers an alternative to a lot of sort of potential pitfalls in life. It offers positive role models. It offers structure. It offers a pathway to somebody who wants to do something with their life. And if that's besmirched, if the reputation of boxing suffers, then the whole thing falls with it. I was a teenager in 1980s Ireland, and it was a sort of socio-economic wreck. You had long dole queues, you had endless emigration in the north, you had bombs and bullets and fear and loathing. And into that vacuum of, I don't know, hopelessness, stepped this mustachioed, charismatic figure with a peace dove on his shorts, Barry McGuigan from the border town in Clones. And he really brings home to me the importance of boxing, because at a time when there was very little hope in Ireland, he provided it. It was a sort of, when he beat Eusebio Petroza in Loftus Road in June 1985, QPR's ground, it was a sort of an affirmation that seemed to say, it's all right to be Irish. Anything in the world was possible. And it really had, for those of us a few years older, I was subsequently at Euro 88 and Italia 90, it had that same vibe. And that is the importance of boxing. But it's fragile because it generally attracts criminality as well, historically. I mean, you only have to look at the stories of Jake LaMotta, Sonny Liston to find out historically the attachments of crime, mafia, boxing. That should never excuse what goes on, but it's matter of fact. And Kieran references Kelly Harrington and the positive effect she had on the community. I walked down Portland Row on the way to the Cork Kilkenny hurling semi-final last year, and it was the day after Kelly's gold medal, and just the sense of joy, this sort of euphoric rush that was all around the place. And you're thinking, this is the very same community, as Kieran said, in which people are being mown down in the very feud that involves the individuals we're talking about now.
The other thing about Daniel Kinahan, from my understanding, is that you get sports washing, and you get like questionable characters getting involved in sports for bad reasons. He actually seems to really like boxing. So you get like this guy who's essentially from the inner city and probably thinks he is doing good, but like boxing, how can it just like shut its eyes and say, yeah, this is grand?
Well, whether he thinks he's doing good or not, I'm not sure, but there certainly was a level of interest. Jerry Hutch was very involved with boxing as well. So both sides of that feud. The reality is, if you're in working class communities, boxing is one of the big unifiers. It's one of the few sports that prospers in inner city communities, not just across Ireland, but across the world. And people who are successful in life, whether through legitimate or illegitimate means, tend to get involved in it. And that is the reality. But there's a sort of coexisting with that is the cliche that boxing and crime, should they go hand in hand? Sure, aren't they all only working class? Which is utter and absolute nonsense. As Kieran said, and I thought it's a brilliant description, these guys are effectively social workers in the community, the people who volunteer. So they may not have come out and criticised all that was going on, because it's difficult if you live among the community, but quietly, silently, and a huge number of those will be very happy with all that has unfolded this week.
In terms of what's unfolding at the Emirates Stadium, I don't know, if you're a Man United fan, I don't know, it's just mad following the season. Bruno Fernandes has just missed a penalty to make it 2-2, and they would have been 2-0 down. They were in a bad situation. Fernandes did a kind of a stuttered run up, dinked it left. Ronaldo doesn't look happy at all. He's kind of like his lips moving in a very I'm not happy at all manner. So Fernandes he basically does this kind of nonchalant hooked wide penalty off the post.
The Jorginho penalty.
The Jorginho penalty, 57 minutes, 2-1. Getting back to you, Kieran.
Yeah.
Just in terms of, so like if you're not into your boxing and the nuances of how it's regulated and how we could get to a situation, what we had during the week is that MTK Global ceased operations. What does this mean?
Well, it means one of the most powerful management companies in the sport is gone now. And, some people think, they'll just they'll pop up somewhere else under different guise. But I'm not so sure that'll be the case, because the Kinahan's priority now is to stay out of the clutches of the authorities and preferably probably get out of Dubai, because the net is closing there. But the world just got small for them. There's not that many places to go to. Like, you referred there to his love of boxing, genuine love of boxing, being from the inner city. And he's from Oliver John Bond Platz.
Oliver Bond, isn't it?
Oliver Bond Platz, sorry.
Yeah.
But he's the son of a millionaire. He's a millionaire son. Christie was a millionaire through crime. So, it's not like he was selling cabbages in Murray Street off a character. Or anything. Like, he's no working class hero. And there's been an attempt to paint him by some people. And his love of boxing, he might well love the sport, but I think primarily why he went in there, like, his first involvement in the sport was actually horse racing. That's when he came to prominence. Was the Kieran Fallon race fixing trial, when they were all eventually cleared. But he called to Fallon's house in the middle of the night with a couple of heavies from Spain, and they were very annoyed that Fallon had won a race that they expected him to lose. And that's the first time, he came to prominence in a sporting sense. So I think what he was always
looking for... He loves his racing too, does he?
Yeah. So I think, to be honest, it comes down to ego and arrogance. And the way boxing, there's no real proper governance in boxing. And he saw a way there for him to become the Mr. Big. Whereas in most sports, he wouldn't have got in the door. Like, he wouldn't have been allowed to take an underage soccer team or GA team, because he wouldn't have passed the most basic guard of vetting. But there's no, especially because he called himself an advisor, he could do what he wanted in the sport. The British Boxing Board of Control said there's no way he would ever get a manager's license. And he was a manager, but he called himself an advisor. So they said they couldn't do anything about it, which is an absolutely ludicrous situation. And unless it changes, another kid could come in and do the exact same. And boxing's instinct, like Roy mentioned in McGuigan Controls, I've always thought, if you wanted to explain 1980s Ireland to an outsider, I would show them a clip of the video of that night in Loftus Road, because everything was in the mix. The Troubles, emigration, little green shoots, of recovery there. There's a little bit of hope to cling on to. And, and the emotion and everything, passion. And the people got on with it in very tough times. And that McGuigan night, like 20 million people watched it on TV. Like, it's hard to explain the impact it had.
And in the second half of the show, we'll talk about snooker, and I guess you look at Dennis Taylor and the audience that snooker could garner back in the day as well. But Tyson Fury hasn't covered himself in Glory Hero either.
Nobody who was close to Kinahan have covered themselves in glory, because their backtracking, their denials, their squirming away have really exposed them terribly. I mean, Fury was happy to give a big thumbs up and to praise Kinahan continually when he thought the fight with his first world title fight had been made. And now he's saying that it's not his fault. Just because someone's criminal, he's not supposed to. He doesn't know the details. I mean, essentially what you're seeing, Kieran said about people lie through their teeth. And that's what you're seeing. When the gravy train was calling at their station and it was being driven by MTK Global, they were happy to jump on that train. Now they're furiously jumping off at high speeds and they're just lying through their teeth. And, the Fury story, you would think tonight there's 94,000 people, and the fight, the record purse of 41 million, and you think, my God, maybe with MTK, maybe boxing's in a bit of trouble. It's the people are behind it. You saw with every controversy that touched Conor McGregor, his popularity seemed to grow. Is there any such thing as bad publicity for Tyson Fury? Unless something becomes legal, he's basically untouchable.
In terms of the Kinahans then, Kieran, it's as you say, the net is closing in the Middle East as well. Where do they go from here?
Well, if they set foot in European soil, they'll be arrested straight away. They're not allowed to enter America. So where are you looking then? There's a lot of, because of the American involvement, there's a lot of countries that won't want to take them.
When you think about Dennis Rodman, North Korea could be a reasonable option.
Yeah, but that's what I was actually going to say, because a lot of countries won't want the heat coming to the Americans. So you're looking at what are essentially often regarded as rogue states. So you are looking at countries who regard themselves as enemies of the US that might possibly open their doors. But I think the likelier scenario is that they will be arrested sooner rather than later.
I think was it something you said to Don McRae, Kieran, that some criminal underworld figure had suggested that they may be moving to Afghanistan? I thought that was extraordinary.
Yeah, there's Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Russia, North Korea, and there was one other I read somebody mentioned as well. So I don't know. What a life that would be, hiding in North Korea.
It'd be hard to hide in North Korea at the same
you're.
time, yeah. Dennis Rodman had a bit of crack over there, of course. Yeah, as in Matt Cooper, actually. That was one of the most bizarre stories ever. It features in Aaron Rogan's book about Paddy Power, where it's like that. I actually forgot how much of a basket case of a story that was.
It was, yeah. Matt made a documentary.
He did.
He did. Yeah. It's funny. I would have been a big Chicago Bulls basketball fan and went over to see a lot of their games, and Rodman was always sort of crazy and lived on the edge and did wild stuff. But when he showed up in North Korea, basically to bring world peace and to incorporate North Korea into the world, wonderful stuff.
Absolutely mad. Yeah, it's 2-2 in the game at the Emirates Stadium. Manchester United, a brilliant move. I didn't see who hit the strike. It hit the post anyway. So Arsenal kind of holding on for dear breath. And just very briefly before we go to the ads, Roy, I mean, it's been a hell of a season for Man United, and it just if you wanted something just to fill headlines and be dramatic, this is what they've been like.
It's a study in chaos. Anything that could happen would happen. But I think the real key thing, and Roy Keane referenced it last week, it's almost gone from anger to hopelessness. You like a bet. United, back in their pomp under Ferguson, were regularly close to odds on starting the season. If I offered you now 5-1 on United winning a league in the next 5 years, would you take it?
I probably would, actually, yeah. I'll have a bet with you over the ads here. No, legally, of course.
Well, limits.
No sanctions.
Legal limits do apply, of course.
We've plenty to talk about after break, including the boy Roy's quest, or otherwise, to live a clean life and to turn down all temptation, because abstinence makes the heart, if not grow fonder, possibly better. We'll be back after break.
The Saturday panel on Off the Ball.
Not sure your accountants do all they should? Talk to Tax Assist. At Tax Assist, we offer a personal and proactive service all year round. Switching is simple and you can do it anytime. Visit us in one of our 20 stores or meet us online to get a free, no-obligation quote. Get the service you and your business deserve. Visit taxassist.ie. We're here to help you thrive.
This is Gomo, award-winning mobile. With Gomo, you get all calls, all texts, all data for just $14.99 a month for life. And with 99% 4G population coverage, you'll never miss a beat. Switching is easy. Visit gomo.ie, sign up, and you're good to Gomo. Unlimited allowance subject to fair use. 30-day contract applies. A one-stop SIM activation fee of $14.99 applies. For full details, terms, roaming and fair use, see gomo.ie.
Short family holiday? Chill get-together with friends? Go Breaks will find the best hotel for you from just €75 per night.
Go Breaks. Mr. Blue Sky, please tell us why.
The Lotto jackpot is an estimated €6.5 million. Play responsibly in-store, in-app or at lottery.ie. The National Lottery. It could be you.
There is a place with a proud history of helping others, a place that refuses to look the other way. Today, Ukraine needs help, and that place is ready to welcome the Ukrainian people with open arms, to support those who have to stay behind. And there's a place to do it all. IrelandForUkraine.ie. A united response from Irish media organisations in support of charities that can make a difference, both here and in Ukraine. Donate now at IrelandForUkraine.ie.
Interested in investing but don't know where to begin? A great place to start is Bank of Ireland's new webinar series, Invested. You can learn about investing with live webinars, guides and insights from industry experts. We know you've worked hard for your money, and with our expert support, it can work harder for you. So don't rest it, invest it. Visit bankofireland.com/invested. Bank of Ireland, begin. Terms and conditions apply. Bank of Ireland is the tied agent of New Ireland Assurance Company plc, trading as Bank of Ireland Life for life assurance and pensions business. Members of Bank of Ireland Group. Bank of Ireland trading as Bank of Ireland Insurance and Investments is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
The following is a recording of a real call made to 911.
I'm at the Burger King. I'm in the window. I tell the lady I want lemonade. Lemonade. She said, we don't have lemonade. I said, why didn't you say that to me before?
Okay, if the food's not done, sir, the food's not done.
The food is done. The food is done. She says she's going to make me stay here for 15 minutes because I'm talking too much with her.
Okay, have you given them any money?
Huh?
Have you given them any money?
No.
No? Have they given you any food?
No.
No? Okay, then you can drive away, sir.
If I'm hungry, why she says she's not going to give me the food?
Sir, come on. I know you don't seriously think that the police need to make Burger King give you food faster. I cannot believe that.
If you have feedback to give, at least get something out of it. Every time you make a purchase at Burger King, visit bk-feedback-era.com, complete the survey and get a free Whopper. Burger King. Terms and conditions apply.
Inflation-busting offers from Lidl are helping families across Ireland with incredible value on their weekly shopping.
Value for money and quality, definitely. They've won me over. It definitely makes a difference for family shop. I'm a convert.
Inflation-busting offers at Lidl. More for you. Customers were paid a gratuity for their time.
Massive warehouse clearance now on at Curry's. Save up to €600 on American-style fridge freezers. And we've got large screen TVs from just $299. Hurry, when these offers are gone, they're gone. So get in store or online at currys.ie.
On 106 to 108 FM, on the News Talk app, powered by Go Loud and Smart Speaker. This is News Talk.
At 2, good afternoon, I'm Tina Gates. 6 people are in hospital following a fire at a house in southwest Dublin this morning. Gardaí attended the scene at Glenshane Lawns in Tala at approximately 4 a.m. A man in his 40s and a man in his 20s are both in serious condition. Ukrainian officials in Mariupol say satellite images show at least 10,000 civilians could be buried in mass graves on the outskirts of the city. Local politician Dmitry Gurin explains the grim discoveries of the past few days.
Bodies that were massively on the streets started to disappear. Nobody knew where Russian troops taking these bodies, and now we know, in mass graves.
The housing minister says all opposition parties ignored a request for input when drawing up MICA legislation. Minister Darragh O'Brien says he hopes the legislation will be published in the coming weeks to be passed by the summer, but he says the lack of contributions was astonishing.
I did seek input from all opposition parties into the scheme. I wrote to Sinn Féin, to Labour, Social Democrats and all other opposition parties, and I didn't receive one response. So I've had no input from any of the opposition parties into the scheme. So we just had to proceed. So I'm expecting cooperation from them when the bill is published and we can get it through the Dáil and the Seanad in a very speedily and efficient way.
The EU has agreed on new legislation overnight to make tech companies and social media sites police their content more closely. Elaine Burke, editor of Silicon Republic, has been looking at the new rules.
Illegal content in this act covers anything from hate speech to child sexual abuse material to the non-consensual sharing of intimate images to unsafe products or counterfeit products, all those sorts of things. If any of that content is on these platforms, they need to be on top of it.
Those travelling by coach to Ed Sheeran tonight will see a longer walk to Croke Park than normal. They're being advised it will take up to 35 minutes to walk in from the new coach parking space on Collins Avenue. It's 2:02.
News Talk weather.
Thanks to Ryanair. Summer's so close you can almost hear the kids screaming from the pool. Fly to the beaches of Spain, Italy, Portugal or Greece.
Mostly dry and bright today with long spells of sunshine and highs of 13 to 17 degrees. Now you're up to date on News Talk.
The Saturday panel on Off the Ball.
Welcome back. It's Johnny Ward with Roy Curtis in studio, and Kieran Cunningham is on Skype. And Manchester United have gone 3-1 down. I mean, I don't normally have much sympathy for them, but I have to have a lot of sympathy for them this game. An awful lot has gone wrong, and after very, very nearly getting to 2-2 and quite possibly winning the game, maintaining their hopes at the top four, Granit Xhaka has just scored an absolute screamer. 72 minutes gone, 3-1. Let's talk snooker. What does snooker mean to you? Isn't it an anachronistic sport that basically is out of kilter with our desperate attention spans? As I say this, I'm actually looking at the laptop because I can't just keep talking without doing something else. Roy, it is a problem though. It's like, and you mentioned to me before the show, you used to watch regularly, you know, you remember the great days and days of the 90s, and then you said darts has kind of overtaken, and I was like, well, that makes a lot of sense, because darts is like bang bang bang. You can see why it's popular. Snooker, obviously, it's kind of, I don't know, and is anachronism the word?
Yeah, I think it might be. I mean, you talk about time. The most famous snooker match of all, Steve Davis, Dennis Taylor in 1985, took 14 hours and 50 minutes of play. So trying to get something like that to hold people's attention now. But I think it's very difficult for people to realise how enormous snooker was in the 80s. I went to school in Sing Street, and we'd go across, beside Cassidy's pub, there was a little TV shop. And we'd stand outside the window looking at these frames for ages and ages. I subsequently ended up covering it. I was there when Ken won in 97. But that period beforehand, I mean, you had Alex Higgins was the sort of the father of the revolution, the people's champion. He was this...
did you meet Alex, did you?
Many, many times subsequently. But at first, as a young fella, he was just this edgy, electrifying genius. I think if anyone wants to see a masterpiece in sport, he was 15-14 down to Jimmy White in the 82 semi-final, knowing another mistake would eliminate him from the tournament. He was clearly trolleyed, and he made a 69 break. That's one of the finest sporting exhibitions I've seen in my life. And we all rooted for Higgins back then. I would have started covering it quite extensively a little bit later. And Higgins and Best were always compared, you know, two Belfast boys with addiction issues. I found a huge difference.
Best was a nice guy,
Best was just a lovely human being when you sat down with him. Alex was deeply unpleasant, aggressive. I was there at the time he was accused of the headbutting the official at the Crucible. There was the time he threatened Dennis Taylor that he was going to have him shot. and they then were drawn to play each other in Goffs at the Irish Open, you know. And this again, as Kieran said, you know, this was height of the trouble stuff, and it was the Catholic and the Protestant, and it was amped up into something really nasty and unpleasant. And we were backstage when Higgins came out, and again, high as a kite, and there was a flower pot just backstage off, and as he was being introduced, Higgins was urinating into the flower pot backstage. And these were microcosms. I mean, there is no doubt, people always talk about the Tiger Woods effect in snooker. The Tiger Woods effect in golf. He came in and made the thing, made millionaires of so many other people. Higgins had that effect. And back then, these guys were, I mean, Steve Davis was the Romford robot, cast as the straight guy to Higgins' wild guy. So much so that Spitting Image, the biggest political satire at the time, had a satirical puppet of Steve Davis as this forever boring guy. But it really did reach a height in 85 when Taylor played Davis. And you've got to remember, there was no Sky Sports then. The only live football that was shown, club football in the year, was the FA Cup final and the European Cup final. The only live GAA were the All-Ireland semis and finals. The only live rugby were the old Five Nations. So there was nothing on telly. We all went round with tennis rackets in summer when Wimbledon came along. We were all Sevi Ballesteros the week of the British Open. But snooker was on all day, every day. And it just got huge ratings. Kieran talked about the 20 million that watched Barry McGuigan. The highest ever rating for anything, sport or otherwise, on British telly post-midnight was that Davis-Taylor final. And then it's sort of Ireland, it became very big in Ireland, obviously because of Higgins, and that morphed into Ken Doherty, one of life's really good guys. And in 97, he played Stephen Hendry, and Stephen was at the height of his imperium, a bit like the Dubs a couple of years ago. He was going for 6 in a row, and Ken beat him 18-12. But the thing that I found most remarkable about covering it, you're at a football match, you shout and scream when things get tense, there's a release valve. You're at snooker and it was impossibly tense, and you can't say anything. And you know, the Crucible, which is sort of like the Gaiety or the Olympia, it's just this theatre in the middle of town. It's a bit dingy now, to be honest.
Yeah,
but there was just this magical atmosphere in it that night. I had Sean Kilfetter of the Irish Times and Tony O'Donoghue of RTE were there, and you really felt like you were part of it because you got so close to all the protagonists. It was great.
Kieran, at the moment, Ronnie and Robertson, I think, they're more or less joint favourites to win this year's one. Ronnie's on the cusp of beating Northern Ireland's Mark Allen. Have you been watching it?
I haven't watched any of it, that's being honest. And like Roy, I used to watch a huge amount of it years ago. It's a very interesting sport as a TV phenomenon because it all goes back to David Attenborough. Who'd be obviously revered for his wildlife programs, but in another life he was controller of programs in BBC Two. And when colour television came in, he decided to show snooker because he thought it was a great use of the colour. And it might never become a TV sport only for that. And Roy refers to it there. When you pretend to be Sevi Ballesteros or McEnroe or Borg or whatever, that it's really hard for people of a younger age to realise how sparse the landscape of sport on TV was. Like, one of the reasons I have a bit of an antipathy towards horse races, there might be 20 minutes of soccer on RT a week, and you would have to sit through 8 races from Haydock on Sports Stadium before the show did so. It seemed to, and as a kid, it seems a very dreary sport because you don't really understand it. So, but it's a funny thing. Like, people wouldn't realise how big show jumping was, for example. Like, my sister Deirdre was born in 79, and her first words were "Come on, Eddie,"
wow.
or Eddie Mackin and Boomerang, because we were all roaring at the telly a year later, Daggett Can Cup. And if you ask most people now what Daggett Can Cup is, they wouldn't know. But that was a huge deal. Like, it's amazing how you latched on to stuff. Like, I remember I used to watch Somerset in county cricket for hours.
Joel Garner and Ian Botham and Viv Richards.
And Viv Richards, because they had these superstars. And that was a kind of boom time for cricket, but it's unthinkable, like where I'm from, that you would do that. But you watch whatever sport was on, and snooker and darts benefited from that. But I do think, I would know Ken as Roy knows Ken, and Roy is such a warm. Ken is such a. You're not too bad as well, right? You're not too bad as well.
I wouldn't go that far.
Ken is such a decent guy. Like, he's impossible not to warm to, and when he tell you, he's so approach. He would tell you so many great stories over the years. Like, he started up as a hustler, in the snooker halls here at 14, 15, He's great stories about that. And he would tell me, you remember he gave me a list of snooker halls. They've all disappeared. And part of it was land prices. Because they were like, you might have a snooker hall on O'Connell Street, and that site is worth millions. So they were all pushed out. So a lot of the snooker halls disappeared. He says attention spans is definitely an issue with getting people, younger people involved in the sport. That you do need to spend endless hours on the table doing nothing else to get to any kind of a level. But I remember he told me a great story. Roy might remember her name. His mother, I can't remember her name offhand. Roy, can you remember Kevin's mother's name?
I should know it, but I can't think.
Yeah, it might come to me. But she passed away a couple of years ago, very sadly. But Ken told me that she was so nervous when he was playing that during the World Championships, her thing was she would go to Houston Station, and whatever the next train was, she'd get the train, and just like I think for the finals, she went down to Waterford, but the next train from Waterford back, and just to pass the time, and she'd sit there, and she just needed to be away from anywhere there would be TV or radio or anyone could tell her what was happening. So, but that was a great moment because he really deserved it, and he got the open top bus to O'Connell Street. He got paraded at Old Trafford, which meant the world to him, and it was great to see because really one of the good guys.
Yeah, I was in school. I remember quite well, and the funny thing about the sport is, and people will play pool or whatever, and it's essentially the same thing except it's a bigger table. But like, if the enjoyment you can get out of it, I imagine if you get anyway good at it, like it's such a technical sport and the amazing things you can do with a cue ball.
Yeah, the bit about getting very good at it, I can't really answer. But
I'm totally hypothesising here, but like
we used to go up, our football team, we were sort of we'd managed not to go on the beer for 2 days before a match, and we used to go up and go and play in a Potter Snooker Hall up in Crumlin Road, opposite the Gate Bar pub, and there was a guy there, actually, Gay Burns, who was a professional player, and you'd watch him and the magic stuff he did, and we'd get the odd 30 break, and we were ready to give up the day job and take it on. But it touched a lot of people. I mean, it really did. And Ken came in with me after one of the All-Ireland finals to Briody's pub on Marlborough Street, and there'd been any number of sports stars in there, and they get a bit of attention. People were queuing for his autograph. Wow. This is honestly 22, 23 years later. This was a couple of years ago, and he was so, as Kieran said, he's such a warm, infectious guy. I spent a good few days over. He's a huge Man United fan in Barcelona when they won the Champions League in 1999, and he'll just sit and tell stories and has this great laugh and love of life. And we talked about boxing earlier, but a lot of these individual sports where people have to sort of hustle to make it, they produce real raw characters who are unafraid of the truth, who are authentic. The PR spin hasn't washed over them, and I think more and more when you see in big time sports, it's hard to get to the essence of people, that you really appreciate people when there's that authenticity about them.
Absolutely, yeah. And I've met Ken myself, an absolute gent. I think we should move on to the Wimbledon's ban on the Russian and Belarusian players. I should go to you first, Kieran. I think this is an absolute disgrace. I think if you were to do this across the world,
it's ludicrous. Yeah,
you could essentially ban. I mean, what Russia has done. He's actually in the halfpenny place compared to what other regimes have done. And I'm not trying to defend Putin in the slightest. But like, if you go down this road, where do you stop?
Yeah.
And it's like as if we accept that being Russia, being Russian and being a Russian sports person, you should think exactly as we think, and you should denounce the regime, and you should do this, you should do that, and you should basically do whatever we think is great in the West. I just think this is absolutely insane.
Yeah, and as part of a cycle, like it was reported fairly early on in the conflict that you had things like Tchaikovsky performances were being stopped, or performances of Swan Lake, or Dostoevsky books were being taken out of the library, and it was just off the wall stuff. And this, like, I'm glad the players' bodies in both the women's and men's game have come out against it, because where does it end? Like, there are a lot of aggressive states around the world. There are a lot of countries around the world that start wars and that cause a huge amount of havoc in other countries, and are you going to suddenly ban everybody just because they're from that country? It's nothing to do with them. It's nothing to do with any of these tennis players. And it's just, it's just showboating by Wimbledon. Like, what is the purpose of this? I really don't understand.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, virtue signalling has become the national sport of a lot of places. Initially, I've been writing opinion columns for about 30 years, and
one of which we'll get to actually very shortly. And so getting to the crux of the matter.
And one thing you always sort of have to have are your thoughts, strident opinions, and argue with conviction, and you reduce the argument to black and white. I actually think there is a bit of grey in this. I read 2 thought-provoking pieces that had very different views over the last couple of days. One in the Washington Post and one by Sean Ingle in The Guardian. And the one in the Washington Post suggested there was legitimacy in what's going on. Now, I tend to side with both your arguments, but not with the same conviction.
Legitimacy in what, sorry?
Well, I would look at it, first of all, through the prism of a Ukrainian. And they are what they are enduring now. And if Putin, and this is not an exact comparison, I know people will start laughing, but Hitler used the 1936 Olympics as a means of glorifying the Reich, of proving the Aryan supremacy. Jesse Owens was one of those who came along and ruined
Take down
arguments.
all the anti-Jew signs.
Exactly. Now, there is no doubt Putin, in a different forms of sports washing, has used any success by Russian athletes as a form of proving this neo-imperialist theory that there is a superiority. Now, these tennis players have largely opposed the war, some very vocally, and it is wrong that they suffer, but there is also collateral damage, and they're suffering in terms of multimillionaires missing out on a tournament that is their livelihood, even if they are blameless. To me, doesn't compare with if that gives some solace to a Ukrainian saying who's being besieged in Mariupol, and people would say there's no equivalency here, that's stretching it, and it is. But that's the point I'm making. I think there is a grey area.
Yeah, but Roy, is there not a distinction though? Like, I can see a strong case made for Russian national teams as a representing the country. But in individual sport, you're effectively representing.
But you can also imagine that
if he does go and win in Wimbledon, say I don't know, say
he wouldn't. If you had a Russian, tennis player going to Wimbledon, what sort of reaction would he get? He wouldn't have a hope of winning anything. Like,
well, Medvedev is the number 2 player in the world, so I mean, he certainly, in terms of ability, does have a chance.
Short of him actually denouncing Putin before it starts to give him a chance. I mean, that's where you let them compete and let the crowd decide what they want to do. You can't just say. I mean, how many American athletes could have been banned from any sporting event for what the American government has done over the years?
I don't disagree with any of the points you're making, but we're dealing with this one currently, and I think if there's an opportunity for Putin to use something domestically to increase his own support, which if a Russian went and conquered Wimbledon, look, they tried to stand in our way, he would present it, we won. This is another example of Russian greatness, and in the propaganda war, it will be an effective tool for him.
I would argue on that. I want to bring you in afterwards, Kieran. I would argue that Putin can use what Wimbledon is doing more for propaganda purposes than actually any subsequent victory.
That's absolutely true. So there is no perfect solution to this. That's why I'm saying grey. And I mean, when I saw the Tchaikovsky stuff and books being taken out of libraries,
that reminds you of the old, like basically the Third Reich.
It's the Third Reich. It's the Catholic Church grip here a long time ago. It's censorship, and any form of censorship ultimately ends up self-defeating.
And sorry, My father lived in England during the Troubles. He was Irish, and Irish people were persecuted in England because of what the IRA was doing. Even though they had nothing to do with it and didn't support it. And in fairness, Kieran, you can't just paintbrush every Russian in terms of the Putin regime. I just don't see how this is a good idea.
No, no, I take on board a lot of what Roy was saying there as well. He made good points, but I just think it's such a dangerous precedent. Like, if you're going to be consistent with this, surely every sporting event will be getting rid of quite a few individuals. Like, does that mean every Russian footballer that plays outside of Russia can't play for their team anymore? Does it? There's been a lot of acts of American aggression over the years. That you go through the amount of people who've been killed in American drone strikes. There's not a hope any Americans will be banned from the sporting. So I think it's. There's just a huge lack of consistency with this. Like, I think it's latching on I understand the argument that Putin definitely has used sport as a weapon, all along through his tenure, through hosting major events, through then there was a state-sponsored doping regime. It was all the aim was just to gain soft power by Russian success in sport, by any means necessary. So I wouldn't have much sympathy for Russian sport generally, but it's probably trickier than I thought. The more you think about it, it's a tricky situation. But my instinct is Wimbledon or Rock.
And I don't in any way disagree with that. It's just, it is one where I feel there's a grey area. There was an interesting point made in that Wall Street, or in that Washington Post opinion piece, where they talked about, in any war, citizens, the notion that ordinary citizens of a country, even if they're innocent, don't suffer, can be exposed. Like the reparations that the defeated nations in World War II, these huge reparations that had to be paid, they were paid by taxpayers' money. So essentially, the punishment for autocratic barbarity fell back on the ordinary citizen who may have had nothing to do with it. Like it or dislike it, there's a guilt by association, even if they're entirely innocent.
Yeah, and I mean, it's extremely complex in the sense of, we're getting very much one side of the story here, particularly from our national broadcaster. I would, we need to hear more from within Russia, and we need to hear more from why this is happening. And essentially, I'm just saying we are getting a biased version of events. Why does Wimbledon get involved though? Like, why does Wimbledon get involved in something like this? Because you're setting this ridiculous precedent here. They can, maybe they can. I think it's absurd. Let's move on to hurling. Let's move on to hurling. Limerick, there was this notion that Limerick might be slightly vulnerable after the league, and they seemed to put that to bed last weekend. As the Waterford game is going to be fascinating.
Look, Limerick on weekends like last week, they resemble a team, who've brought down the curtain on any prospect of defeat. You watch them and you think they've just a little bit too much of everything. Physically, tactically, they have, you get guys like Gearóid Hegarty and Kyle Hayes, who are these super-sized flamethrowers. They have the physique of a rugby back row, and yet they've the touch and stick work of an old-style corner forward. Cian Lynch, even on bended knee last week, was able to produce a moment of wonder that would just have you gurgling.
With a half-broken heart.
I think essentially a moment of truth has arrived. I was going to say in the hurling summer, but we're only in April. Waterford moved with such impressive momentum throughout the league. I think there's a huge amount good in what happened to Waterford last week, even though Tipperary gave them a hard game. Tipperary were always going to do something in the first match. Hurling is sort of how they measure themselves. They've someone there like Noel McGrath, who I was describing during the week as sort of hurling's Modric, this timeless, creative force. But I think Waterford need the fact that they were able to withstand that early barrage and come back after all the league hype really spoke to me of a team that's on a huge upward curve. The fact that they again have kept Austin Gleeson, Jamie Barron in reserve, that they come on. But they've lost the last two games to Limerick by 11 points. If that happens again tonight, we can put the green and white ribbons on Liam McCarthy now. So I think Waterford had a great white hope for the hurling summer. Obviously, the gap back to 90 and 59 makes them every neutral's choice, I suppose. But if Limerick blow them away with the ruthless intent that they just dismantled Cork last week, it's very hard to see how this summer is in any way competitive.
Kieran, would you agree?
Yeah, I think Waterford are the only hope of taking them down. Unless Kilkenny can come up with something unexpected, like. I think Kilkenny are the only team in Leinster with any hope, but I think Waterford and Limerick.
You're writing off Galway altogether, are you?
As a threat, All-Ireland threat?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I wouldn't give them a hope. That's been honest.
We'll see about that.
But Limerick, Waterford, it's funny because they're two counties with huge affection for, and it goes back to, because where I'm from is definitely not hurling country by any means. So the first hurling game I was at in my life, I reported on. That was a Limerick-Waterford championship game 30 years ago when I was a freelance. And I have an affection for both counties since then, I think, maybe because of that. But it's a strange situation because Waterford are now kind of where Limerick were for years. Like Limerick went so long being seen as a team that'll flop in Croke Park in the big days. They'll be nearly men. They'll get so close, but so they'll still be a long way away. And And now they're seen as a force like Jim Gavin's Dublin, that they're just this juggernaut to smash everything in their path. And like Waterford, for all their progress, have been in 2 finals in over 60 years, 2 All-Ireland finals. You know, they didn't come anywhere near close to being competitive in them. So we still have a lot to prove. They have a lot of the raw material needed to challenge Limerick, but I think it's overstated. Their panel strength is overstated. That really, they only got into the game last week. People say, "Oh, look at the panel they brought in, the guys they brought on. It shows how strong they are." But the guys they brought on, like Ty Burka and Austin Gleeson and Jamie Barnett, like they would be starting a fully fit. They'd probably be starting today. So it doesn't like the guys that started ahead of them were found a bit lacking. So I think I'd be interested. Like, they could have 3 meetings this year. They could meet in the Munster final. They could meet in the All-Ireland final. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But I think this is one where Waterford have to put down a marker. They have to get close at least.
I think Kieran has nailed it there. I mean, we've seen with Liverpool and Man City what a rivalry can do for a sport, and they're potentially playing 3 times in this very concentrated time period if they play again in the Champions League final.
Which they probably will.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us would have a lot of time for Waterford. I've sort of been half supporting them in hurling since the time of John Milan and Tony Brown and Ken McGrath. I love those guys because they all played without helmets. They were sort of swashbuckling musketeers who went out and died on their sword. And they've a couple of players like that now, with Austin Gleeson most notably, who ironically maybe needs to actually just concentrate on the hurling side of the game because he gets distracted, but a phenomenal talent up there with Cian Lynch and Tony Kelly as guys who can just take the game to another level. But I think a lot of people, I admire Limerick and what they've done hugely. I mean, it started after their players' strike in 2010 when they got the McManuses involved and they got their coaching structures in place, and they've really invested 10 years in that. I mean, Vincent Hogan actually has a very interesting piece on that today, and the rest of the counties are playing catch up. But as it stands at the moment, I think Waterford are the only hope. Perhaps Kilkenny. Cody managed to inflict their only competitive knockout defeat over the last 4 years, but it'd be very difficult for them to do that. But I think we'd all like to see Waterford at least challenge them.
Absolutely. Right off Galway at Traperd. We're going to go to a couple of previews now of the games on at 3 o'clock. Before that, it's ended up 3-1 at the Emirates. So Manchester United's top 4 ambitions are effectively with O'Leary in the grave at this stage. They are done. So it looks like Arsenal and Spurs are battling it out for that 4th place in the Champions League next year. Let's go first to Man City Watford. Adam Jury.
It's no less than 6 changes for Man City from their midweek win over Brighton, 3 of them up front as Jesus, Sterling and Grealish come in for Foden, Bernardo Silva and Mahrez. In defence, Diaz and Zinchenko start over Ake and Stones, while Fernandinho replaces Gundogan in midfield. Watford make 3 changes from their loss to Brentford, King replacing João Pedro up front, while Ngakir and Cleverley come in for Femenia and Kuchka. It's Man City versus Watford at the Etihad.
Shane Pennington is at Leicester, Aston Villa.
Leicester boss Brendan Rodgers makes 4 changes from the side that drew 1-1 at Everton on Wednesday night. In come James Justin, Kaglasion-Chu, Patson Daka and Adamola Lookman. They replace Ricardo Pereira, Johnny Evans, Kelechi Iheanacho and Harvey Barnes. Jamie Vardy is back on the bench after injury. Whilst for Aston Villa, Stephen Gerrard makes 2 changes from the side that were thrashed 4-0 by Tottenham last time out. In come Ashley Young and Leon Bailey. They replace Luca Dean and Danny Ings. At the King Power Stadium, it's Leicester and Aston Villa.
Yeah, and Newcastle, who've absolutely bombed up the table, take on Norwich, who are obviously going down. And at that game, we have Guy Swindles.
Norwich make just 1 change from the defeat at Manchester United last time out for the visit of Newcastle. Christopher Zimmerman is in for Ben Gibson in defence. He drops to the bench alongside Max Aarons and Brandon Williams, who might have thought they'd been the starting 11. Newcastle boss Eddie Howe said he'd shuffle his side for this one, and is as good as his word, with 4 changes from the side that beat Crystal Palace in midweek. In come Lascelles, Willock, Sean Longstaff and former Canary Jacob Murphy. In for Shah, Shelby, Almiron and Wood, all named amongst the substitutes. It's Norwich Newcastle at Carrow Road.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes with the lads, and there's only one place to finish, and this is your I mean, let's all have a 5 minutes of self-reflection of men in their middle age or pushing on beyond middle age or whatever we're at.
You're a bit younger than us, John.
I'm 40 this year. So that if that isn't middle age,
it's youth, positive, shining youth.
Says, I guarantee you, Johnny, it's young. I wouldn't mind.
I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll say maybe at 40 then it's middle age, but I'm in her 30s at the moment, I suppose. So I'll go with that. Okay, Roy, I have to. I'm just trying to find the quote I have from the article here for our talking points, and this was an article that you had last week, in which you're essentially talking about the difficulty you have in giving up the good things in life. I'm paraphrasing there.
Yeah. I made a huge mistake last week on Good Friday, feeling good about life. I stood on the weighing scales, and essentially I convinced myself that I was the product of a one-night stand between a breakfast roll and a keg of stout. It was during. I've always had an inclination towards the heavier side since I stopped playing. I used to play every sort of sport and stopped playing. I had problems with my back, and I've a gluttonous appetite for life. It would hardly be a state secret to say that bar stools are my favourite place in the world. I love old style pubs, and I love pints of porter, sitting there and just taking in the social history that these places represent. But obviously there's a flip side to that, and I'm 53, and there's, as you put on pounds, and there are health implications, there are energy implications, and there are huge self-esteem issues, because when you're walking around you're carrying a lot of weight, and it's not something that people my age talk about much, and I'm not particularly into image or fashion, as most people would know, but it does sort of puncture your sense of self. Your psyche takes a bit of a blow when you're carrying weight. But the flip side of that is I find huge mental health benefits in being out and socialising and doing those things that carry implications. I really struggle to know how you get the balance right, because to get myself back to anything approaching fighting weight, I'd have to stop doing the things that make me happy.
I was sitting on a stool in an intoxicated condition in Grogan's licensed premises. Adjacent stools bore the forms of Brinsley and Kelly, my two true friends. The three of us were occupied in putting glasses of stout into the interior of our bodies and expressing by fine disputation the resulting sense of physical and mental well-being. The stout was of superior quality, soft against the tongue, but sharp upon the orifice of the throat, softly efficient in its magical circulation throughout the conduits of the body. Fortunately, that wasn't actually the man to my left, that was Flann O'Brien, but you can kind of see what he's getting at. You can kind of see what Roy's getting at as well, Kieran.
I was actually going to say I thought it was Roy. I was going to say that sounds a bit like that.
It could have been Roy.
Yeah. No.
Flann O'Brien was always a pleasure.
Flann used to plagiarise himself, but yeah.
Yeah, indeed. But I'd be roughly the same age as Roy. I'd be 2 years old at 55, and well, one of the things that really strikes you is, like, all of us, you lose people before your time. Like, you lose family or friends in your 20s or 30s you don't expect to lose. But when you get to this age, you find it's more common. Like, you hear, you bump into somebody and they say, did you hear with your man, he's been diagnosed with cancer, or, he had a heart attack. So you do become more conscious of your own mortality. And, particularly during lockdown, I got in the habit of having a few bottles of beer at home fairly regularly, like most nights. And as you get older, you do find hangovers far harder to deal with, and it affects your sleep more. So I've stopped drinking with home completely. I was thinking, well, I just knock the drink in the head, get a bit older, just stay healthier. But I don't want to give up, as Roy says, the social part. I want to keep pubs, so that if I'm in Donegal, I meet friends and have a few pints. I don't want to be sitting there with a glass of water for the night. I still think it is very important for your mental health. I can cut back the drink by not drinking at home, but I still want the pubs to be part of my life, because I think they are important. In moderation is a very, very positive thing.
Yeah, and in fairness, Roy, JD walked into the office there a couple of weeks ago, and I was struck by how much he's clearly lost weight, and this is no doubt down to the fact that it wasn't only booze as well. It was like he cut out a lot of these things in life, but I suppose the key then is to maintain that rather than celebrate it by going to the pub.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to meet John quite a bit in McDade's, and I was in here a couple of weeks ago when he sent out the tweet about his weight loss and his fitness regime, and you could sense his delight, his actual joy in himself, and he was in a very, very good place. I I never drink at home, and ironically during the first lockdown I went 3 months without any drink, and I lost 2.5 stone, and you have more energy.
Did you?
Yeah, and I found it easy to do because to me it's the combination of pub and pint, one without the other, and I've no interest in sort of suburban pubs, you know, those awful Weatherspoons, that sort of stuff. It's the Palace Bar, it's Neary's, it's Keogh's, the Long Hall, Mulligan's, Briody's. These places that to me are sort of social museums. They're part. There's a great sign, a quote from Con Houlihan behind the bar in the Palace. A bird is known by his song, a man by his conversation. And my favourite, I set myself a target every year to try and read 200 books in a year. And there's nothing I like better than going in a couple of afternoon pints and just losing yourself in a book, listening to the conversations around you. And honestly, if I didn't do that, I would be a basket case. I live on my nerves at the best of times. But those pints, we tend to forget that, particularly clinical analysis of health tends to forget sometimes the mental health benefits that you get from just unwinding. We're all mortal anyway. We're going to die regardless of how we live life. But there's almost a squeezing out of the joyous part now to try and extend the misery almost.
I'd like to disassociate off the ball from everything he said there, but I completely agree with him. Thanks for coming in. Kieran, it's been great having you on.
No bother. Thanks, boys.
After the break, David Jennings talks racing.
Off the ball on News Talk. The Pat Kenny Show.
As much as you love parenthood, it's undeniable that it shuts down possibilities. And that's another thing that, like, readers so far are getting in touch with me and just saying, like, it's so relatable in that respect. And, you know, it's great to have them as insurance for the other end of your life when they'll be